Every time I hear Public Enemy doing that thing, I want to, but I can't because I'm on camera now. How y'all doing? Greetings. Good afternoon. Good evening. My name is Thandisizwe Chimurenga, and this is a special edition of Rootwork here on the Black Liberation Media platform. Now, even though this is a special edition, like we always do, in the beginning, please like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like this video, share the link, subscribe to Black Liberation Media if you're not already a subscriber. And if you are already a subscriber, be a subscriber to Rootwork and now also Cooperation Jackson's YouTube channel. It's called Jackson Rising on YouTube. Please subscribe to all of these media platforms. These are Black folks doing what we can on this platform, doing the best that we can to create our own media to keep you informed with the information that you need. Again, like, share, and subscribe. Special edition of Rootwork in conjunction with Cooperation Jackson. We are presenting the Build and Fight formula. The Build and Fight formula is both an argument and a proposed methodology on how to build eco-socialism from below, meaning through the self-organized activities and institutions of the working class and oppressed people. The principal architect of the Build and Fight formula is Brother Kali Akuno, co-founder, co-executive director of Cooperation Jackson, which is based in Jackson, Mississippi. And Cooperation Jackson, of course, is committed to building a solidarity economy in Jackson, anchored by a network of cooperatives and worker-owned, democratically self-managed enterprises. Kali is no stranger to the platform, been here many times. We appreciate him. And now, Cooperation Jackson and we have entered into this partnership to bring this educational series to you and your friends. So again, like, share, and subscribe. So I need to stop talking so much and let our guest, Kali Akuno, talk to you all about what is the Build and Fight formula of Cooperation Jackson. Thank you so much, Kali.
Always a pleasure, Tandi, to be here. Especially honored to be here tonight to start off this kind of educational series. We are planning on doing this. This was it the second Tuesday of every month. So please be advised. Let your friends know, your family know, your fellow cooperators and comrades to join us. Tune in. And as we go along, we are going to be asking questions. We're going to be looking for feedback, pushback, because what we are going to go through, we make no pretension that it is the answer. We think it is part of an answer, and it helps to kind of maybe ground some of where we need to go, particularly in these perilous times.
Hold on, so you say you want some pushback? You want some smoke?
Oh yeah, we want the smoke. We want the smoke, because look, it's not smoke for criticism's sake. Let me be clear about that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We want to construct a new world, and we have to struggle with each other to get it right to do that. Right? So, correct theory should lead us to better practice.
Well,
and so we have to sharpen up our tools, and we have blind spots. We don't see or hear everything. It's not possible for one individual, one human being, one organization to do that. So that's why we want feedback to sharpen things up. That's how we've kind of come to this and arrived at this in a number of different things. And it's what you're going to hear from me is quite literally born as much failure as it has been the little bit of success that we've been able to garner, right? But it's learning from every mistake, learning the best possible anyway, learning from every mistake, learning from every failure, and trying to iterate at each point how to do better, right? And doing intense criticism, self-criticism, and deep reflection on, these are the things that we need to do. So this is what this is all based off. So yeah, we definitely want and appreciate feedback. Doesn't mean we can get all to it, respond to every point or be able to get to it, at every, immediate instance. But believe me, we take it all in to reflect, because this is part of the study study process that we have to be involved in. So definitely hit us up, and be on the lookout. And believe me, the feedback we get will inform what we're going to be doing throughout the rest of the year. Right. Okay. That is how we've been building this, and we've been working towards this, for a minute. So we're going to try to keep this to an hour each time.
Okay.
And any of y'all heard me speak, sometimes that could be a challenge. So my comrade Tanya is going to keep me on point as much as possible to get there. So today we're going to go through, a few kind of early points to just kind of articulate a framework. And just, I want folks to know, kind of a basic outline is of this intro is really trying to make a case, building an argument on why this particular set of practices, principles, and positions could lead to a revolutionary transformation.
Okay.
And why it's particularly, we argue, grounded in the history of this moment going forward, based upon the concrete conditions that we are facing, and based upon what people are already doing in the millions, right? Because we have to start, we argue, with where people are at, and then build upon that, but then try to fill in gaps, but also to make some arguments, right, that need to be made to push us all further along the road, and ask, get us to really think critically, why are we doing what we're doing? How could it be better? How could it lead and aggregate to us building and amassing more power, us ending certain social kind of relationships between particularly those of exploitation? How could it lead to all those different things? So,
okay, so what is the building fight formula?
So first, to lay out the argument, I want to just lay out off the top, like, this is premised on a notion that concretely, y'all, we don't have much time to enact the radical transformation that we need on this planet, right? The capitalist system is killing this planet and killing it rapidly. And so we are going to have to get rid of it before it gets rid of us. So I want to state that very clearly. Now, that's in some respects, many respects, most respects, easier said than done. But one of the critical shortcomings is that most people have gotten to the point, particularly over the last 40 years, where it's easier to envision the end of the world than it is to envision the end of capitalism. So we want to challenge that, like, up front. We want to challenge that, and we have to challenge that. Okay. And the first kind of premise of the argument is that profound radical transformation is possible. And we want to back that up. You say, well, prove it to me. We want to back that up with the critical analysis of the last 15 years, but the last 5 years in particular. And to really highlight to folks that we've already lived through some profound transformation. Now, it wasn't necessarily sustained. It wasn't always consciously, directed, meaning something that we in the masses agreed to and deliberately wanted to do that. It was somewhat spontaneous in relationship to the conditions. But we've seen a great deal of transformation. Now, what do I mean? I'll go back to basically, let's go back to 2011. Okay. Now, we can go back earlier, but I'm picking that as a kind of an arbitrary date. And one of the things people ask me to cite in this is some of the sources. And so one I'll mention here, I want folks to check out a book called "If We Burn," right, which is an analysis of the 2010s and why all of the social revolution, the social upheavals, I should say, that occurred during that decade did not lead to a revolutionary transformation, and in many respects wind up installing the exact opposite. So if you look at Egypt, if you look at Syria, if you look at Tunisia, etc., what happened with the Arab Spring, but then also if you bring forth, what happened here in the United States was part of that same motion, right? From what happened in Tahrir Square to the Indignados to Occupy, right? That wind up leading, you can make a clear kind of case and following history, that wind up leading to the mass uprising that we saw, at least the form and character that it took at the George Floyd rebellion that happened in 2020, but also the response, which is now kind of being borne out by Donald Trump and the rise of the MAGA movement.
If We Learn by Vincent Blevins.
That's right.
Blevins.
Check it out, or check out some of their videos. And it's not necessarily that you have to agree with all of their analysis. I certainly don't, but it's an excellent kind of just documentation of moving through that decade till you see how these events pick up on each other, how folks are learning from each other, through the internet, through social media, right, through the mass communications channels, how they accelerated time, how folks try to copy each other and what they were doing, sometimes to great effect, sometimes to ill effect, right? And then how the distortion of the media, I think he cites a good case in terms of Hong Kong and some of the protests that happened there, trying to, what they call the pro-democracy movement. We can argue if that's what it was or not, but in terms of the tactics that they employed, right? One of the things I think he does a good job of highlighting, both in his speeches and in the book, is how they, at a certain period of time, some of the key actors pivoted towards acting to elicit the greatest response from Western media and abandon what their people had already gravitated towards. And so they became more isolated and more small as a result. So critical learning. But some of the tactics that they wind up developing there, and how to avoid gas, how to use gas masks, how to deal with some of that, we wind up incorporating some of the George Floyd rebellion here from folks making direct connections. Also, folks making direct connections, what happened like with Ferguson some years before from the Palestinians, right? To just bring this home in this methodology. But the critical piece I just want to cite real quick and then move through is that if we look at the profound, the nature of how those uprisings transform society, polarized it, if nothing else, that is a profound transformation that we are living through. That means more space is actually open for us to experiment with, and we need to recognize that and be cognizant of that, because the ruling class forces then and now, during this period, we need to be clear. They do not have concrete answers. This is not like the end of World War II, where they laid out the Bretton Woods, program that wound up restructuring the world. It still structures a large part of the world that we live in, but that was based upon a clear vision plan, right? And a clear understanding of they had control of the various organized forces that they could deploy to enact their program. They don't have that now. They're trying to institute that now. I'm just particularly citing the United States, what they're trying to do with Project 2025. So they try to develop a level of cadre, but they don't, believe me, they don't have that all worked out. It's not all crystal clear, despite the chaos that Trump is unleashing on this society. Believe me, it ain't all worked out, right? And they are, shooting darts everywhere, trying to see what sticks, trying to see what holds. But the difference between us and them is they have command over the state apparatus and a command over all the institutions and instrument of capital at their disposal to kind of shoot and fail and then pick up. Whereas there's more, we have to more get it right kind of the first time in order for the transformation to take place. And we need a bunch of luck. So the critical piece is to understand that the space is open. And then there's a second part of this I want folks to kind of understand in terms of this argument around the possibility of radical transformation being possible and potentially being on the agenda. Now that is really going to depend upon us, and that's what we're going to get into. But I want folks to just go back to another episode in 2020, right, which is the beginning of the pandemic. And this is one I tried to cite. I'll reiterate it here. I'll go back to make a connection. And in 1992, there was the Rio Summit. So the first big international climate change summit. And this occurred right after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Eastern bloc, right? What most folks our age, would call kind of the core of the socialist world, the socialist experiment. And it collapsed, leaving only China, in the main, Cuba, Vietnam to a lesser degree, being kind of the last major kind of socialist projects, operating under that vein. Well, we were told on the heels of this conference on the world scale that yes, climate change was a serious issue, but that the global economy was too complex for there to be any immediate, answers to the crisis of carbon emissions, that it was too complicated, that the scale was too significant, right?
That's a lot.
Well,
Go ahead.
Fast forward to 2020 and the political necessity of grinding the global economy and global trade to a halt comes into play on the account of the COVID pandemic and dealing with something that they didn't quite understand, but knew that it was spreading like wildfire, and they had no ability or no means at the early stages to fundamentally contain it without containing the flow of goods and of humans migrating or moving from place to place. Mm-hmm. So they restricted travel. They were, basically said we're only going to allow essential services, the essential workers to come, the essential services to be open. Mm-hmm. And they basically ground global commerce to a halt. And guess what, y'all? Climate emissions, methane emissions dropped dramatically in the course of months. So much so that we saw nature within the course of just 2 or 3 months, things rebounding, deer coming back to and coyotes and stuff. Like in San Francisco and LA, the animals were just coming back to spaces and places that they had long since vacated, right? On account of the human interaction there, right? And guess what? They stopped this, right? And it wasn't for a long period of time. They stopped it, and the world system didn't collapse, right? The sky didn't fall, right? Mm-hmm. What we learn from that and what we have to deduce from that is radical transformation can take place if there is sufficient political will to do so. And for that very brief moment in time, I say it lasted about 6 months at max, there was sufficient political will. Now, there was a reactionary move against it, and we're still living in part with that reaction, right? Mm-hmm. But it demonstrated, and this is just one of many examples, it demonstrated that change can happen. It can happen in a profound way, and it can happen quickly. So I want folks to just move from that and saying, if what we witness in our own lifetimes should open up our imagination to envision the possibility of capitalism coming to an end, and it coming to an end on account of our organized activities and deliberate and consequential action. Yes. So the critical thing moving from there is that we also then have to kind of deal with the next piece. We have to deal with kind of understanding some of the dynamics of the system itself. This is the second critical piece of this argument.
Okay.
And there's an article, again, citing a source. There's an article that myself, two of my comrades, Doug Norberg, Brian Drolet, we wrote in 2001 called Shifting Focus. And that's an underscoring argument here, right? And that was, organizing for revolution, not for crisis avoidance, right? Subtitle. So I want everybody, if you haven't read that, to pick that up and look at it, because it's a subtext to much of what is going to be laid out throughout the course of this series. But I'll just summarize it in a couple of critical points here. For this one, I'm actually just going to read to make it quick. Y'all know I hate, for those of you who know me, I hate doing that and I hate PowerPoints, but I think it's important, right? So just start with this notion that we need to be clear that we need to be organizing, building for revolution, not reform and crisis avoidance. Just as the piece said, this is fundamental. Now, what does that mean? Let's get into that. This is point 2, right? The deepening crisis humanity faces is not rooted in human nature, as many will argue, right? And most of these arguments are based upon that, right? It's rooted in the economic and social systems humans have created and have, developed and have evolved over time.
Mm-hmm.
Key relationship that distinguishes the different types of economic system that have structured most of its, human history, is that between producers and the appropriations of surplus labor, which, in its monetized form is surplus value.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I'm describing here is the evolution of class-based societies, just for folks to be clear, and how they've always had these kind of distinctions, right, between like landowner and serf, right, lord and peasant, and in our area, the dominant one being between employer and employee, right,
Mm-hmm.
boss and worker, and the last version of this, the capitalist version, or is the former producer and appropriator of surplus value, right? To be clear about that. And that we need to be clear that we need to from a revolutionary perspective, that we need to reject all of these different forms of hierarchy and domination. That's a critical piece that we need to be clear upon. And where that leads is that understanding that dynamic and that relationship in the present era, between capital and workers is another way of putting between employer and employee, between boss and worker, right? Between capital and workers in the main dominant piece. We need to be clear, and this is the third point, and I think perhaps the most critical point for this particular era and purpose in this argument. What we've fundamentally been getting trapped by time and time again, I would argue basically since the Great Depression, is an argument primarily amongst the left over which form of capitalist rule we should be fighting for. Primarily because we don't believe the radical transformation I was speaking to earlier is on the immediate horizon or is possible.
Yeah.
And so we wind up getting into a bunch of arguments about, can the capitalist system be reformed, and can we help to usher in those reforms, right? Without critically, making a distinction that, number one, and we're trying to put this in a global perspective. We want folks to understand very clearly, because then it helps to arm us in different ways in terms of fighting back. I want us to be clear about that. But there's this notion sometimes like that fascism is something different than what we understand as bourgeois democracy. And I'm not saying that they are the same, but they spring from the same root. And that root is capitalism.
Okay.
And capitalism will employ, based upon various conditions, right? It will employ different forms of governance in order to replicate itself and reproduce itself, right? And to protect itself in order for it to sustain. So there's some periods in time, right, that we're kind of coming to the tail end of that. Me and you, and probably a good chunk of our audience, were born in the 1960s and 70s, and we caught the tail end of what one could call social democracy, right, or like the welfare state. Now, the neoliberal order that they ushered in the 1980s is largely eviscerated most of that, not completely gone. I mean, they're working on that now. So when you hear this argument about the Republicans talking about they're going to destroy the Department of Education, or they're going to destroy ultimately, Social Security, they're trying to complete that neoliberal revolution of privatizing everything.
Right.
But just keep in mind that those things that they existed were still within the capitalist framework, right? So Social Security and all those benefits, they still allowed the appropriation of our surplus value. They just taxed a certain amount and then distributed a certain amount, but it left the rulers in place.
Right.
They didn't go anywhere. And the rulers never completely agreed with that program of being taxed, right, of being regulated, and they have fought back. And in this recent iteration, if you look at Trump or Urban or Modi, or you put it on the global scale, they fought back and repositioned themselves, at least in the current era, where they are now calling the shots and dismantling this old era. And they're ushering a new phase, kind of a neo-fascist phase. Well, neo-fascism is just another variant of the capitalist system. Now, I'm saying that because, we need to get past fighting about with each other, particularly forces on the left, fighting with each other over which variant is going to be better than the other, because we've now, I think safely can say, within the last century and a half, lived through enough variations of this to know that if we don't kill it, that the other form, its opposite form, will just reemerge. So like if social democracy doesn't actually move towards the abolition of capital and is undermined, then it inevitably leaves the capitalist class and its enablers and supporters in place to build a reactionary movement that over 10, 20, 30 years will come back, right? And move itself and usher itself into power. And that is where we at. So we have to figure out how to end this thing. Now, the critical piece of what we first are articulating, this is the kind of the third point, is that starting with where folks are at, right? We have to end this deficit kind of mindset that we have and analysis that we have. And what do I mean by that?
Please.
We are constantly in this notion that we do not have enough forces. We do not have enough people. And if you mean enough people who are clearly in line with a particular politics, program, and worldview, you are absolutely correct. If you're thinking about it just strictly in kind of a vanguardist way of moving social revolution, then you are correct. However, if you look at what people are engaged in that has the potential of transforming social relationships in a non-capitalist way, we see that there are millions of people just in the United States alone, but I would say even more outside, who are engaged in practices that if sufficiently coordinated, right, could lead to a radical transformation. And what I mean by a radical transformation, like this is the piece we'll get into later, but they're within the cycle of capital. And if you could probably bring that one up, the one that says David Harvey, to go to give people to understand Thandisizwe a little bit. And this is
cycle of capitalism, David Harvey.
That one.
I'm not seeing that.
It's a graphic.
No, I know that, but which one is it? I have production.
I think it says David Harvey in the thing itself, or Harvey is in the title. While Thandi is pulling that up, comrades, the just a little kind of one-on-one. So you're
not talking about mutual exchange, use exchange, and commodity exchange.
No, not that one. That is one by David Harvey. But what I'm getting to that is that there's the dominant typical form of how we understand capitalism to move is the circulation. That there it is.
Okay, it doesn't say Harvey, but okay. A little
small. But this circulation, without going in too deep, because we're already at the 30-minute mark.
Yes, sir.
We are trying to upend this particular valuation of surplus labor and surplus value. And we're going to go through a part of this so folks throughout this course understand this, but then also an argument of how we take initial concrete steps through the practices that are articulated in the solidarity economy as a basic means to integrate a way to move past this and to get to a spot wherein that we aim our collective endeavors towards the production of exchange values, use values, right? Not commodities. And that we now possess the technical means and capacity to move in ways that previous generations could only, dream of. And this is so folks understand that the computing capacity, how capital wants to use it. As you listen to Peter Thiel, capital wants to use it to basically subject labor to total domination and control. There's another version of this wherein we could utilize all of this is kind of the wealth of human ingenuity and the accumulated kind of expression of humanity's intellectual growth. We could use it to transform society within our means to make our labors and endeavors easier with the context of appropriate technology. And what I mean by appropriate, things that are socially appropriate, that don't require a great deal of waste or excess production, too much extraction from the earth, and then things that are produced based upon need, not just based upon endless commodities that often just wind up in a trash heap somewhere because they don't produce the amount of profit that their producers want. And so they find of different ways to dispose of them, or they do, plant obsolescence. Instead of making things that could be durable for a generation, they make them to make sure that they fit a cycle of consumerism, wherein things, time out or break very calculated in intentionally.
My car, my iPhone, my laptop.
All these different things. They can make them a lot durable. They can make them a lot better. There are certain dynamics of the market where they choose not to. So this is part of the cycle of what we're going to upend. And what we're arguing for is that if we take what millions of people are already doing in the engagement of certain key solidarity practices, that we can create our own, kind of value change that then upend this and move us towards production, towards values in our communities. And that we would argue we have enough critical mass already that we could be major catalysts for this, for the development of eco-socialism from below. But it requires, and this is the piece, it requires a greater level of political clarity, intentionality, democratic coordination, right from below, and concerted planning to eliminate excess waste, but to also meet the human need that exists. Because believe me, right, there is no reason why in 2025, with all the excess production of just food alone, that there should be any human being on this planet who goes hungry.
Shouldn't be not one.
Not one.
Not one.
That is a problem not only of distribution, because some people will leave it at that. That's one dimension of the problem as it presently exists. But ultimately, we have to figure out how to socialize the means of production and put all of us in a democratic practice of being able to access common goods so that we can meet our common needs from the collective pool of what humanity has produced. And the solidarity, the practice of the solidarity economy are the anchors to that. That is the argument. And then what we present as the formula are steps, a set of steps, what we call the kind of the practices of position and the practices of maneuver. And the first part will go through the practices of position, and that's taken from Gramsci, very intentionally and deliberately. So folks, Antonio Gramsci, Prison Notebooks, for those who've never read it or don't understand, want to know what the source is, go back and look at that for this particular piece. And that's about how you deal with hegemonic and counter-hegemonic, dominant and non-dominant forces, and how the non-dominant forces can organize themselves to form a new, both cultural view, worldview, and practice that distills kind of an anti-systemic practice to underscore, undercut, and ultimately destroy the dominant, kind of perpetuation of ruling class ideology and practice. So that's what we are trying to aim with here, right, in these positions of maneuver, and what we're articulating with that. And then this is what the next couple of pieces will go over is we're going to break down in detail, using PowerPoint, all this different stuff. How do you practice mutual aid, and how does mutual aid and social reproduction lead to gathering enough information about the concrete needs that then we can then leverage that and connect it to doing a concerted level of planning around autonomous food production through a scale-up program of meeting all the different community, small-scale farms to large-scale farms of independent farmers and producers, tie them together to meet particular needs. But then we also have to figure out how the mass of workers into appropriate, basically, the means of productive, turn that into cooperative enterprises and link with each other to put all of the tools and all of the collective property into a pool that we could use to meet our collective needs. That's where the worker self-organization pieces come in, and we're going to talk about within that how we take the cooperative side, the trade union side, the worker center side of what is concretely going on now, how to better kind of link that together in a strategic way to utilize as much power. And we'll break all of those down individually in that way.
let me jump in real quick. I don't want to take you off your focus too much, but this build and fight formula, practices of position, practices of maneuver, this is going to be done in conjunction and partnership with other organizations, correct?
Oh, absolutely. None of this of what we're talking about is could be done by one organization.
Okay.
None of this, and why we say we're starting part of making the argument of starting what people are doing,
Okay.
right? Because we don't have, let's be clear, what the large part of this argument underscore, we don't have the political parties of the 1930s or even the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
That's not where we at,
Okay.
right? And if we look at least in the United States, in most of so-called Western world, is profoundly different in the global South, where in the global South, you still have, organized factions of the left in terms of political forces there, particularly in Latin America, who can and are moving on things. And we'll talk about how that kind of relates. But in our kind of U.S. context, we don't have political parties that can move tens of thousands, if not millions of people into a concerted program. But what we do have, right, we have millions of people who are involved in projects where they're doing, farming in their communities of various scales.
Right.
It's just not coordinated, right? It's not being planned to meet the basic caloric needs of our community. So most of it's done, to meet kind of personal needs or small scale needs. And I would say, like, even in Cooperation Jackson, we're doing, trying to do a level of scale to reach about 25,000 people. But Jackson is a city of 160,000 to 180,000 people, give or take. Mm-hmm. So, we have to figure out, coordinate with other folks in Jackson, how to scale up production. And that doesn't mean Cooperation Jackson is going to do this. Our role is to just be a catalyst to say, hey, if we do this, this is what it could lead to, right? We can move from food security ultimately towards an element or aspect of food sovereignty, at least on the local level, so that we can meet the caloric needs and we could end food as a weapon. But then more importantly, right, we could free up more people's time, right, from having to pursue the endeavor of wage employment, right, so that they have more free time to do more of what they want to do, and you can kind of reduce folks' bills. Now, there's a system that has to go on. That's what this formula is saying, that these practices have to be coordinated in conjunction with each other. Otherwise, they're just kind of isolated endeavors that may make some things of our lives a little bit easier. But if we don't deal per se with the broader dimension of like land decommodification and the collective stewardship of land, which is an anchor of where we need to go towards food sovereignty. If we don't deal with that and deal with kind of collective housing solutions, right, you're still leaving folks subject to all the predatory things of the market and the need for ways to meet the market kind of necessity that's been structured within the capitalist system. So it's trying to be comprehensive within the framework of what people are already doing. And what I mean by ending this deficit, piece is that if you take the whole of all the different organizing efforts that are taking place just in the United States alone, like in the housing arena, right, for health and reproductive justice, right, for workers' rights, if you aggregate that all together, there's a lot of people working on a lot of stuff.
Yes.
A lot of people, millions of people working on stuff every single day. But because we don't have a framework to unite it coherently, right, and one that's co-constructed, right? And so this is an argument for co-construction, not one that just kind of impose something from above, because we've seen, time and time again, that has its advantages, but more disadvantages than advantages. So a co-construction of how do we get people to plan and coordinate with each other to aggregate power, right? But to also transform the system by getting out of those, that cycle of MCM, right? Money, commodities, money that is premised, the capitalist society is premised on, which forces us all to be, chasers of a wage, or another old way of saying to be wage slaves and be dependent upon that to earn our livelihood. It's either that, if we don't build an alternative, we'll be thrown out in the streets or go hungry. Right. And remember, this is in a society which produces an overabundance, or world system that produces an overabundance of all the material goods that are necessary for all of humanity to live well.
I'm seeing a couple of questions in the chat. Let me just a quick reminder: if you come here to play or not serious, you will be booted out of this chat. Now, y'all know I'm tech spicy, tech divergent. It might accidentally hit ban user as opposed to just deleting your comments. So be careful what you put in the chat. One of the questions that we do have here, if you want to tackle it now, because we are at 4:42, and you did say you wanted to keep it to an hour. I'm sure folks wouldn't mind hanging out, but let's see what we can do. Michael Nugent asks, what about these arguments about techno-feudalism or that capitalism is in terminal decline? I've been hearing that for 40 years. Are these changes legit, and do they change how we fight, who the revolutionary subject is? Your thoughts?
Great question. And I've been thinking about doing a particular set of series just upon this from my vantage point. And let me riff off a comment that you just said, Thandi, right? Mm-hmm. That you've been hearing that for 40 years. Well, it takes that long for the system to actually, if not longer, to collapse, right? Okay. And so if we go into some of the works of, say, again, citing sources I want people to read, and you don't have to agree with all of it, but if you look at some of the works of like Immanuel Wallerstein or Undergrunder Frank in their particular assessment of the capitalist world system, we see that things take roughly 50 to 60 years to sink in and transform. Okay. So if you're thinking about it within, and this is part of a level of consciousness that we have to kind of ascribe to. So within the context of our own lifetime, you might dismiss certain arguments, but if you look at it in the context of several generations, you'll see that, yes, this system is in a very terminal decline. And I would argue that techno-feudalism is not just a symptom of the decline, right? But it is something that is going to hasten and speed it up. And for me, I had been arguing before, and for folks who, again, to cite a source, if it hasn't been put in the chat, one of the main framers, I think the lead framer of this techno-feudalism argument is Yanis Varoufakis. Look up his book on techno-feudalism. I can't remember the exact title.
Varoufakis, is that the brother from Greece?
That's a brother from Greece, a comrade from Greece, who
the austerity movement.
The post-austerity movement. He was in the Syriza government, which, in my view, wind up making a classic portrayal of the people, leading them down a dead-end path. Part of what I was arguing against around, what type of concessions we can get, from capital rather than making a clean, or some would argue kind of a dirty break, and going it alone, at least in regards to them switching out of being part of the EU and going back into kind of their own currency or their own transactional relationships, and then using that to foster the dynamic growth of the solidarity economy, because Greece had that at the time, and then one definitely emerged in the midst of their crisis following the financial collapse of 2007, 2008, 2009, that there was a profound social movement that they wind up basically kind of betraying and gave space to the current right government, which is now in place in Greece. But I think, this terminal decline has led to the rise of all of these neo-fascist forces, or these are right-wing authoritarian forces, the likes of, again, outside Modi in India, Erdogan in Turkey, we can go on, Erdogan in Hungary, Malay in Argentina, and the list goes on. And unfortunately, we'll probably have, a right-wing government in Germany and in France soon as a result. But this
are these changes legit?
Go together.
Are these changes legit, and do they change how we fight? Who the revolutionary subject is?
Legit. If the answer is the system moving in that direction, I would say, if that's what is meant by legit, clearly that is what's going on. I mean, and we can just look at what Trump has enabled in terms of the cabinet and like what he's done with Doge and Elon Musk, basically kind of making him his co-president. But it's not just him, right? It's all the techno-feudal lords, which have made a very clear and conscious decision to ally themselves with Trump and the MAGA movement on a very deliberate nature, and why they are very much invested in a deep race over AI, artificial intelligence, and this global competition to who's going to get there first, from between themselves being the United States and China, and why J.D. Vance in real time is over in Europe now threatening the Europeans that they either get on board with the United States and open up all of their markets towards the U.S. domination of AI and work with them, or they're going to be punished. Now, you don't normally talk to your friends like that.
No, you don't. You're not supposed to.
And so, that speaks to a different time, a different order. That is not just about Trump's personality. Folks need to understand that, right? This is about capital's deep restructuring and trying to get to a particular place, right? So that the West maintains its hegemonic control over the earth, over its peoples and all of its resources, so that a certain group of people continue to benefit at the expense of others. So that race is still going on. That is why Elon Musk, who's supposed to be running part of the government now, is trying to issue a hostile takeover of OpenAI. Right? Put these things in perspective to understand what a techno-feudalism piece and the argument of why it's legit. Does that change how we fight? I would argue, and we'll go through it, in some ways profoundly yes, and in some ways, at least in terms of what we're articulating, no. Right? Now, what we need to be clear on, I think, in terms of kind of like what principles and program, the piece that we'll get to where we talk specifically about social digital infrastructure, that deals with how we in community production within this formula, that deals with how we are arguing that we should be engaging in these kind of new technologies, but not engaging them on capital's term, but to the greatest extent possible, appropriating them at the scale that they could be utilized through open source to create our own means. And that is why, just to cite and then get back to this, that is why I want folks to go back and look at I'm forgetting the name, Deep Seek, whatever, the AI piece that China put together. That was a profound move, y'all. And I'm not saying that to like praise, China, but that was a pretty concerted move that opened up a tremendous amount of space. And what they fundamentally did by making that open source, they made it so that folks in Nigeria can take some elements of their code and work on it without having to deal with the proprietorship or ownership. Or me and you can learn how to code and be involved in that and help this technology grow and function and ensure it actually functions to serve human need and not further, right, the private appropriation, capture, and social control that the capitalists are aiming towards very explicitly. If you don't believe me, listen to what Peter Thiel said about 2 weeks ago.
So this can be done through our labor unions, right? Or is that idealistic?
It's going to have to be done through them and beyond them, right? And to be clear, like we need those institutions to, be transformed from the inside, and we need them in particular to jettison, the agreements that have confined them and that folks kind of adhered to, for the greater part of about 70 years. And what am I specifically relating to in terms of the United States, right? Like we have fundamentally, and I've been part of the trade union movement, still part of the trade union movement, but we've kind of hamstrung ourselves in accepting the National Labor Relations Act and its framework that comes out of it, right? Which keeps us from acting in politically or acting in solidarity in a number of fundamental ways. And then how that's supported by the right to work regime structured by the Taft-Hartley law. We have to go beyond that. And we should have been going beyond that a long time ago, right? And so we now have to, be very clear that to the degree that the MAGA movement is very intentional about destroying all of the liberal bourgeois protections that supposedly are enshrined in the Constitution, we ain't got no need to uphold it either. Right? This is where our mind and space has to open up and seize the opportunities that exist amongst the contradictions that they are creating. So if they're not going to necessarily play by the rules, there's no reason why we should either. And we have to step out of that to now figure out how do we engage in a broad union kind of co-op initiative to like fund each other, support each other, build our collective strength. How do we start now move in a concerted level to like organize? To link it to the previous questions.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get all of the major unions that are part of the AFL-CIO to now step wholeheartedly into supporting the workers at Amazon, right? To unionize, and then not only to unionize, I would press, and this is part of what one of the times I was able to kind of sit down with Chris. We had a brief conversation, a presentation. Chris Smalls is who I'm referring to. Brief conversation. He said, "Don't just settle for unionization, right? Press for social control, right? Cooperatize the space." Mm-hmm. That is how Amazon basically should be run, basically either as a public utility or as a collective-owned cooperative. So open our imagination towards the appropriating. We have to, go back to be very clear about we're trying to expropriate from the expropriators. That is a fundamental task that is still before us. It's just the means by which we have to do it and the instruments we have to do it by. Some of them have to be reinvented by like the trade unions, and then some things we just going to have to create anew, right? Basically somewhat from scratch, but starting from where people are already engaged in the millions in social activities that speak towards a broader transformational project.
How much of lack of coordination is due to lack of physical infrastructure versus lack of network relationships across difference? Where is best to put our energy?
Yeah, that's a damn good question. Glad it was asked.
And real quick, the graphic we put up, that circle, from where is there a link to that, or that's in a book?
Folks, there's a series. David Harvey has been doing a series about Capital for years now, where he breaks down Capital Volume 1. And there's a series of lectures that you can go to his YouTube page, or you can go to him, look up David Harvey, and you can get an analysis. Now, I have some nuance with David's read of Capital.
We asked about the graphic. Look at the graphic, bro. Where can we get the graphic?
You'll find it there.
Okay.
Right? Or you'll find it in his book, a companion to, I think, Capital. He has
companion to Marx's. Okay, got you. Lack of coordination versus lack of network relationships.
It's both.
Okay.
Right. And the Capital is always, fostered and facilitated uneven development. And so this is part of, the part of the legacy of Capital only building things that serve its particular needs. And so that means certain sectors, certain people, certain groups are left out, or certain folks wind up being incorporated into basically sacrifice zone. Like I would say that Jackson fundamentally, has become in essence a sacrifice zone, at least most of it, to Capital. And so, a lot of part of what we're struggling with is the lack of infrastructure. But the lack of infrastructure is an obstacle. It's a barrier. I think the deeper one is the lack of coordinated relationships. And that requires the organizing. And then we have to, look, if we got to like bicycle to find ways to connect with each other, or walk a couple of miles to connect with each other, necessity should demand that we do so to overcome the infrastructure limitations. And this is fundamentally where we're going to have to get to, I think, if we're serious about transforming the system. And trust me, I'm citing things that people do in the real world all over the globe, maybe not in the West, not here now, but these are practices that people do. So don't think it's impossible or it's insurmountable.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a spreadsheet and a calendar for coordinating, or what?
Well, this is what we mean by social digital infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. And we'll probably come up with a better, tool for that. And I know some comrades that we're working with, I'll cite two that the folks want to look up some of the work that they're doing. One is Grassroots Economics. They just came out with a book on how they're utilizing basic elements of kind of, cell phone technology to be able to do complex transactions within, community in Kilifi community, in Kilifi, Kenya, and beyond, to help coordinate and do the type of planning that I'm suggesting is going to be necessary. And this is low grid, low tech. Then there's more, kind of advanced versions that are being worked on by like the One Project in particular, a piece that they're kind of, working on that we've been somewhat, at least on the advisory end of, that I would cite that people should look at. But if you want to look at, I'm forgetting the name of the book. I will cite it in some notes and make sure to bring it further along. But I think the best example of even a low-tech system or version of what we're trying to go to deal with some of the complex problems of like some of the socialist experience, like the calculation problem that many of the projects suffered from and moved through in the 20th century. We now have the computing power on cell phones to deal with a lot of things that they just did not have the capacity to grab information in the quick instance of a fraction of a second. We now have that at our disposal. We're not utilizing in this means, right? But because it's owned and controlled, that data is now a new form of capital being used and kind of colonized, if you would, by the techno-feudal lords. But there is still enough time and enough know-how that we can redirect our skill and the techniques to do the kind of level of appropriate technology to develop, programs that enable us to coordinate. And some of this stuff is already out there. It's not that spreadsheets can't help but to aggregate, moving from like a time bank that has like 200 people to try to move something, say on the scale of Jackson, where again, it's let's say there's 180,000 people. We're going to need far more sophisticated tools to aggregate and plan that out. And we argue that those are basically kind of at our disposal. Doesn't mean that we don't need to tweak them or work them or to learn more, but we need the intentionality and the political direction and agreement around a program like this, that there's a necessity to do so that is required.
As someone who focuses on affordable housing, land stewardship, I'm very interested in the overlap between food sovereignty and land stewardship in that context.
Well, that would be the second. I'm speeding some of this along. Definitely would take all of the questions and everything, the comments. So please keep them coming, or to send them to us, on the YouTube link on the Jackson Rising or on Root Work. We'll pick them up there. Black Liberation Media, the different places that this is going to be rebroadcast. We'll have people kind of going through that to kind of tease these out and make sure that we incorporate these questions in the presentations that we do. They'll sharpen things up, and y'all have already, touched upon the critical things that I think a couple of these questions, the techno-feudalism, the infrastructure question, all of these have been very, very helpful. So keep them coming. But we'll definitely tackle that particular question around that intersection, right? In the third session, which is going to be about food sovereignty and land decommodification. And then there's a deeper component of it, which we actually ultimately need to argue for, both, which is somewhat specific to settler colonial societies, but there's a deep element of decolonization that program has to be matched with. It's not true everywhere, so that's why we kind of left that out. But for the articulation of what we need here in the United States, this settler colonial project and the need for its dismantling, we'll be dealing with that during that section.
That was the David Harvey graphic. I keep seeing more questions later on for you people who came in late asking about that graphic. And, well, I did see one. Hold on. I don't know if that's rhetorical or not, but there's a question for you. Can all the urban agriculture projects in New York City feed the city? Is that the best way to feed the city? If there's an uprising in New York City, will surrounding farmers and producers come to our rescue?
In short, the answer to that, no. No. Can it alleviate some of the stress and strain? Yes. Can it put people in new relationships with each other within the city context? Yes. Right? Could it help free up some people's time, labor, energy? Absolutely. But if it's not coordinated, right, with a network of farmers outside of the city into an extended and intentional value chain that's following this particular program in politics, then you just be set up for failure. So, a large part of this is not just urban, right? We have to figure out how to do a very integrated piece. And I would argue, that the more rural areas are actually far more ripe and will become more ripe for a particular program like this, I think, in the days going forward as Trump unleashes more contradictions along this field, right? And let's go back to just remember, just briefly, let's go back to remember when Trump hit China with some tariffs back in 2017, 2018, the quick response of the Chinese government and the surgical nature of their response, which was targeting primarily, red counties, the counties that voted for Trump, which were mostly rural, and how it targeted farmers. And most of that, market basically never came back. The soybeans, the Chinese just, said, we'll get our sourcing now from Brazil, right, and support them. If y'all don't want to play, we'll do that way. Well, that's created a bunch of contradictions in the heartland that we, I think, as the left, have not found a full way to kind of engage or exploit. We don't have the relationships and haven't been intentional about creating the relationships. That's, I'm not saying uniformly, but I'm saying like in mass, that's not a particular aim, because most of us have written most of those folks off. It's like, that's just MAGA base. Well, MAGA base is now facing some major contradictions. They are already facing some severe labor shortages on account of, shooting themselves in the foot, those who supported him, supporting the deportation, but now don't have, no labor force to do their work, and they're not going to force U.S. citizens, quote unquote, back into the fields, paying them U.S. wages, standard U.S. wages, without driving up inflation, which will make it harder for them. And then this tariff, what Canada and Mexico and other folks are going to hit back, is going to make the life of those folks very, very painful for a while. And so, his aim is to stimulate more industrial production. That's going to take more than a notion, more than just simple investment to do. We need to step in and through our mutual aid work, which we'll go back into, we need to step in, start building relationships, and start moving them towards being a part of our kind of extended network, and meeting some of their principal need for resources, and then our principal need for food. And that there's a relationship that I don't think we should disconnect. And I'll cite, a critical piece of why that's not as impossible as it may seem. Again, go back to the early days of the COVID pandemic in 2020. And you saw that a lot of our mutual aid work, the explosion of it, particularly in parts of the South, parts of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and over into the Midwest, there was a mass explosion of farmers, particularly mid-sized and small farmers, who took their product directly to communities and distributed fundamentally based upon need, right? Not based upon a profit or exchange. And they came up with mutual ways of doing that. That happened within our living experience. And that is something we need to be intentional about, not only, picking up, learning from, replicating, but extending into a broader network. But, is New York going to feed New York? No, you just don't have, enough land to do that. But you can build relationships in your immediate environment to do so, because that's where, that's what already exists, up through the Hudson Valley and all that other kind of stuff. But we need a re-articulation of its intentionality.
How do we combat racial capitalism's ideals of individuality and encourage connection and material resource sharing, and mutual aid across groups of people, and scarcity is socialized into us?
I want to do a piece where that particular framework is actually challenged, and I mean racial capitalism. So I'll put that in for another piece, because there's elements of that framework coming from Cedric Robinson, for those who don't know, largely born out of his book called Black Marxism, for folks, for again citing sources, to check out. I got some profound disagreements with that brother and his work. But that being said, it's critical, Thandis, that we make clear, so not that he didn't make any contributions. I'm not saying that by no stretch of the imagination, but I think he also let us down.
Eat the fish and leave the bones, brother. Please, for the love of God.
We also got to avoid the pitfalls and the traps, Tony. That's why.
Eat the fish and leave the bones, for the love of the ancestors.
But in terms of the individuality, encourage connection, right? That is a hard challenge. One of the hardest. I often argue that the most successful thing about neoliberalism the last 40 years is its actual cultural impact, even more so than the effort at privatizing everything. Now, those two go together, but it's cultural impact, the creating, breaking down society, wherein, the prophecy, if you want to call it that, of Margaret Thatcher, where she said there is no such thing as society. They're just, individuals and families. They've done a damn good job, at least in large parts of the West, in atomizing things, and we have to be very intentional about recreating collectives. And it starts it very small, but it has to start in aggregate, and that is where the struggles to build. Why? And let me put it this way, just in the interest of time. There's a reason why we start with the mutual aid in social reproduction that deals specifically with your question, Grace, because we have to build trust amongst each other, right? And we have to reconstruct the solidarity, rebuild that. And without that, you won't be able to build no relationships, and none of this other stuff will even be remotely possible, right? It may be, necessitated by the circumstances, but if folks don't see it and envision it, and then, work with the intentionality to create these types of relationships, we're going to fall short. And that is a critical piece. So we'll take that up a little bit more. I'm gonna just stop there on that question in the interest of time, since it's past our hour. But I could go on if you want us to, Thandi.
Well, I wanted to get to as many questions as people had as possible. And I may have, well, let's see, I've got that one. Did you get to everything you wanted to get to tonight?
Of course not. But that's why we're breaking this out throughout the course of a series. So we will work to get there, just tonight was just starting to frame some arguments, but want to go into practical components. That's what the meat of what I'm hoping to get with all of y'all. Encourage everybody is to tune in and to join us in this path, in this course throughout the year, and help us sharpen it up so we can get there. But there are practical steps that I'm hearing people. Well, how do I do mutual aid? How do we do this? How do we do that? And we want to, at least share from our experience of what we've gleaned on how to do these things, and then collectively draw from everybody to then put that out. That's what we mean by the co-construction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just going through a couple of comments real quick.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one. So, yeah, one of the critical pieces, one of the things I didn't get to, and I'll just state in short here that deals with this part of this question, right? Not that we could stop necessarily, by doing things in a broad democratic manner. There is no safeguard of stopping liberals or even reactionaries from coming in and appropriating, some of these frameworks. That is going to entail political struggle. And so there are a certain set of principles that we are, encouraging folks that have to be a corollary to this particular framework, right? And the critical piece, it starts with an anti-capitalist framework and upholding that. And within that, you then have to build upon or scaffold upon, anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic, pro-queer, pro-trans, all those different things that we have to be grounded upon. And it's not to limit like who could be involved, because we need to struggle with people who come in with ideas that may not be affirming of everybody's humanity. We're gonna have to do that. That's just where our people are at. How we embrace people in their difference, and and be clear about at what point do you just say, hey, that's not something that could live in this space, because your behavior is oppressing other people, right? Or limiting the life chances of somebody else. Like, that's real. We got to be real about that, because fascism as its root is the anti-life politics, right? It is premised on death as a means of social control, right? Or social death as a means of social control, right? Both of them working in corollary with each other. So there's some limits to what we can't withstand. But we have to be, I'm gonna be real, we got to safeguard some elements of what we are articulating from liberals. Let's be real. Right? And their appropriation. And within that, there's a danger that we have about, certain elements of collaboration with social democratic forces who want to tie this, to like, certain types of vantage points with the Democratic Party, when this needs to be something that's totally independent of either of the two, at least in the United States context, independent of either of those political forces and their particular strategic relationship and dependency upon capital. So we have to work outside of that. Now, that does not mean we're going to move this without capital. The question is, how do we do that, right, without succumbing to its dictatorship? And that is a very real challenge. And so we'll articulate that, more in the start of our next piece to outline that very clearly and to put that in writing. And what we're going to do with all of these is, have little PowerPoints from here going forward that kind of break down some things that people can use and take. And, however you want to translate that into your organization's work or community work, people feel free. But we are going to make a strong argument around fighting against that reformism very concretely.
So tonight was the introduction of the Build and Fight formula under practices of position. This is going to be monthly here on Black Liberation Media, on Rootwork, and on the Cooperation Jackson's YouTube channel, Jackson Rising. We'll also be working in conjunction with Rosa Clemente and her Disrupt the Chaos show, available on her YouTube channel. The next session will be these are going to be Tuesdays for the rest of the year. March 11th, Mutual Aid and Social Reproduction. April 8th, Food Sovereignty and Land Decommodification. May 13th, Worker Self-Organization. June, Community Production. July, Social Digital Infrastructure. August, Self-Defense. September 2nd, People's Assemblies and Planning Councils. That's under the practices of position. Under practices of maneuver, in October, we'll be talking about general strike. I saw someone in the comments asking about the UAW's call for general strike in 2028. Democratizing the economy in November. And finally, in December, dual power and freeing the land. Let's see here. And I had asked you earlier also, you said that this Build and Fight formula is being done in partnership with other organizations, and those organizations are part of the People's Network for Land and Liberation. And if I'm not mistaken, Community Movement Builders, of which Kamal Franklin, a co-founder of Black Liberation Media, is a part of that People's Network for Land and Liberation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All righty. So it is 5:15. I believe in trying to adhere to people's time, be respectful of people's time as much as I possibly can. I know these folks in the chat would love to hang out here all night. That's by themselves anyway. They would really love to hang out here with you all night. I'm not going to do that, though. So, any last words from you, Kali?
Yeah, I just wanted to end, with the critical piece around, let's organize for revolution, not crisis avoidance, y'all, and give this some serious thought and consideration. And I just want to, leave in part with a little song of inspiration to fight against reformism, right? And the appeal towards moderation, which definitely is not the call of the age, right? And I want to leave you with a song I play sometimes for myself for inspiration. This is the Wailers with Peter Tosh taking the lead. It's called Burial, and it's based upon his notion that rosters don't go to no one burial, let the dead bury the dead. So let's leave the capitalist system, leave it to its own ruins, and let's build what we need to build together collectively, right, with each other. We got a lot of issues and struggles to navigate, but we got to do it together. There is no other way.
All righty, so let's take a listen to this. Bob Marley and the Wailing Wailers. You know it's old if they say the Wailing Wailers. This is with Peter Tosh and Bunny. Is it Bunny Wailer? Was that his name?
Bunny, that's right. Bunny
Yeah.
Livingston, my man.
Right, when they were all a part of the group. So let's take a listen to these words real quick and see what they're talking about. Hopefully that's loud enough.
You want me to
All right, y'all.
but me no go. Yet you want me. And them a claim say. Now we know the truth. We find you wearing the boot of taking people's business on your head. Might as well you be dead. You must want it. Come on, funeral. But me no go. No one baby. Yet you want me. Come on, funeral. And never takes it. What the big disgrace. The way you rob up the place. Robbing everything you can find. You even rob the blind. You must see one if you come funeral. But he no go. No one burial. Yet you want me. Come funeral. And I met them places. You must see one if you come funeral. But me no go. No one burial. Still you want me. And I'm a case. Now we know the truth. Find you wearing the boot. Taking people's business on your head. Might as well you be dead.